I want to continue on with this conversation, but I want to shift gears just a little bit to get the perspective of someone who has actually worked in this capacity. As you know, our listeners know, I spent 10 years as a police officer, but I want to bring in Congressman John Rutherford. He's a former sheriff of Duval County in Florida as well. He's a member of the House Committee on Appropriations. Congressman Rutherford, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Tony.
You've spent a career in law enforcement. You know the importance of having a presence on the street and its importance in keeping, the community safe. Also, as sheriff, you oversaw local prisons and jails. This call to defund law enforcement and to incentivize the closing of prisons and jails at the state and local level, where's this going to lead?
Well, Tony, I can give you from experience a situation where we did defund the police, and it actually occurred in 2011 in Jacksonville. I was sheriff at that time. In 2011, the city of Jacksonville had the lowest murder numbers, lowest violent crime numbers they had seen in 40 years. And I attribute that to really what I call the pie of fighting crime, and that's PIE. The P is prevention, the I is intervention, and then the E is enforcement. And what these people are calling for, if you cut out either one of those legs of that three-legged stool, Tony, the whole system is going to collapse. And so what happened in 2011 in Jacksonville, we got a new mayor elected. He cut my budget so significantly, we had to lay off 147 police and community service officers, actually another 92 community service officers, so 230 crime fighters. And guess what happened after that, Tony?
Crime went up?
Crime went up. Murder went up. Violent crime went up. In the neighborhoods that we were in there working with some great community outreach. We had the entire thing going. Mayor Payton, who had been the previous mayor, who really gave me the resources that I needed within the police department, and but he also funded programs in the community for at-risk youth, and those were great. We put together a great reentry program for those coming out of state prison so that they were successful when they came back to our community. So we had the prevention, the intervention, and the enforcement. And just by cutting one leg, Jacksonville is still suffering. This is 5 years later. They're still suffering from increased homicides and violent crime.
I asked your colleague, Congressman Stubbe, if he thought this would get any traction, but clearly there are some within the upper ranks of the Democratic Party that thinks this is a way forward, is to cut the funding of law enforcement. It's happening in cities across the country. I mean, it's taken us nearly 3 decades to see a steady reduction in crime from the 1970s. That's all at risk in that.
Well, listen, I'll say this too, Tony. This bill is really more like the Green New Deal masquerading as law enforcement reform, because when you dig into this, you see elements in there dealing with the environment, expanding medical care, Medicaid, a living wage. I mean, there's a lot more in this bill than just defunding the police, although that is a horrible piece of it. Yeah, no question that is a key part of every measure they put forward. We're wrapping up, running out of time, Congressman, but very quickly, the impact this will have on the average law enforcement officer on the street, this move to defund police. Tony, it is going to cause irreparable harm, because what's in this bill also is eliminating qualified immunity. Are we done? You got 15 seconds. Okay. Qualified immunity is the bedrock of law enforcement. If you do away with that, police officers will not be able to do their job. They won't do it for fear that they'll lose their family's future.
Yeah, and we're actually already seeing that. Law enforcement officers kind of backing up out of fear with what's happening. Congressman Rutherford, thanks so much for joining us. And as this conversation continues, we want to get you back on to talk more about this from a personal perspective. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony.